here to get a few more joining, but I would like to welcome everyone to our first virtual Grow North event. We are excited today to have Pete Speranza from the 301 Inc. venture arm of General Mills. Pete has been in and around our ecosystem for a couple dozen years, so he's very well versed with our ecosystem and even nationally when they look at investing across the country. And so today we will have this conversation with Pete, and I want to first touch on a few housekeeping things before we get going. We're going to break this presentation into two parts. The first, Pete's going to go through a little bit of the current state of the food system, how it's been broken, and how that's impacting a lot of the decisions that are coming down the road. So if you have questions during this point, please feel free to type them into the chat. And then Sharada and myself will be gathering those, and then we'll have a bit of a pause at the end of his slides and have I'll ask those questions to Pete, and we'll have a little bit of a dialogue there. And then he'll start up on the second half, which is the impacts during COVID and how they changed their viewpoint. And again, type in your questions. We will ask them at the end and hopefully get that dialogue going there. And then if there's time at the very end, you guys are able to kind of put in the chat who you are and see. And if you see someone who you think you'd like to connect with and there's time and you both, mutually agree on that chat to connect, we would love to have you kind of spawn some more of those conversations later and take that offline. And so we will give one more minute here before we get going. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Allison Hahn. I'm the new ED for Grow North, replacing the tremendous Lauren Pradhan, who left a few short months ago. And with me is Sharada, who also works at Grow North and is helping with any technical challenges. If you have questions, she's your gal. And then we have the glorious Pete here waiting patiently to get going. Patiently to get going. He's been chomping at the bit. We've had these conversations. So we will go ahead and get started. Pete, I will let you take it away, and Sharada and I are going to jump off video so you can have the stage.
Yeah, I would say thank you. Thanks, Allison, for inviting me to this, and thanks for everybody for joining today. I mean, it's always fun to be able to share a little bit of what we do at 301 Inc., but also obviously what the impact of the food system and what's been happening there, especially during this COVID-19 environment. Three things I'll really kind of walk through today, and it's to give a little context and tell a little story, but it's a little bit of around industrialization of the food system, right? The evolving kind of consumer food values and how that's been shaping up over the last few years. And then obviously the impact that COVID-19 has had really onto both, but also how it affects kind of the investment world of things in the food, ag, and beverage space. So I'm hoping to kind of give you some background, but also it will lead right into the COVID conversation, which is where I want to not just end it, but also hopefully that's where a lot of the questions lie as well. If I go on to the first slide, this is a little bit of I'll call it somewhat education if you don't have a little history on the food system or how the industrialization happened. But think about a couple things. This is a 250-year kind of journey that's been happening actually in the food system, especially in the U.S. And it all started with food commodities. Commodities were created about 150 to 175 years ago. And it was really built for, consistency and, how do we get prices consistent across the country? How do we actually get food in every pocket of the U.S.? So there was a lot of good reasons why the food commodities were built, but in reality, it was all around minimum nutrition requirements and for the same price. And that you could, once it was established in Chicago, the commodity market, you could get that same pricing, no matter where you were at. And also think about kind of the other big piece of it is probably over 150 to 100 years ago, a lot of the the for-profit big food companies have been built, including General Mills that I work for today, 150 years old. And it was created for shareholder value, right? But at the same time, they were built to, basically serve the community at large and do it in a way that actually gave everybody access to food, did it pretty efficiently, and obviously kept it pretty affordable, especially back then. So if you tie those two things that happened over the last few hundred years, and then including something that piled on top of it, which was really the Great Depression that happened just after these two areas really got established quite a bit, is what I think drove the ecosystem the way it was built a long time ago. Now during that, if you think about food commodities back to GMOs and pesticides, those were tools that the farmer had to start using because of that pricing model, because they were feeling the pinch, on the field, and they were figuring out ways to basically, become more efficient. And then if you think about for food, it was a little bit more around how do we extend shelf life, right? How do we get line pricing in market? And it was driven for a lot of different great reasons at the time, but that was kind of the world that we lived in. But the problem is, and why I talk about this thing being set up for failure and actually pretty unbalanced, was it was actually pinching the farmers to a point where they were trying to figure out ways to be efficient and stay alive in a sense of running their own business. But in reality, they were kind of taking and stealing a little bit away from the animals and soil, because they were the only two probably folks in the room that actually did have a voice. So if you think about, tie stalls and other things that happened on kind of commercializing the animal feed market, and then also on the soil side, just the stripping of the land. I think most people know in the last 50 years we lost half our soil. So anyways, this sets it up a conversation around, all right, what needs to change, because everybody believes that this unbalanced environment just cannot sustain. So then in the last probably 15 to 20 years, I would say more than ever, and some of it is just the information kind of revolution that's happened in the world, right? The internet, the world shrinking, the 24/7 news, the educational shows and cable, I think gave consumers a lot better tools on how to think about food and how it is presented in their lives, but also how they use it and how they value it. And this to me is it's not an evolution. It was really a revolution over the last 20 some years. And it really caught some of the big food companies by surprise quite a bit, in a sense of not just innovation, but where consumers were heading. And if you think about it, and I kind of target 4 different things to kind of give a feel for, I'll call the loss of trust that happened, I'll call in the food system, but also in some of the mainstream brands that were around that were really supporting consumers in a big way. And if you think about trust thy neighbor, right? It turned into, I'm worried about food quality and food ingredients, but I also am going to trust, rating systems. Or if I see 9,000 people giving a 5 rating to something, it will change my buying habit in the food world than ever before. And it's just a new dynamic. And if you think about it, you don't know any one of those 9,000 folks, but you would trust them probably more than you trust a big company telling you, that it's good for you or that it tastes good or whatever, more than anything. And you do that in your lives in a lot of different ways around hotels and other things as well. So it's just kind of a natural way of thinking about it. But if it had 1 star, I mean, you would think twice about buying or purchasing a product. Think about family dynamics over the last, probably 50 plus years. Families, especially in the US, families are shrinking, right? Yeah, you're getting later in your life before you get married. Disposable income, I think, is definitely different. And then, I would say priorities, right? People used to say they were house poor. And what that really meant was they wanted to afford the house that they really wanted and really could live in and get excited about it. But they would have to trade off different things in their lives. And some of it was always food and access to food, or even just the type of food that they would buy. They thought it as fuel more than quality that was feeding your body. And it was just those family dynamics. But it's been changing. And I think everybody on this call probably knows, the willingness to pay for quality, the willingness to maybe make different trade-offs to make sure your food quality actually stays at the level that you'd want it at, to really be nutritious for your body and actually keep you healthy, keep you sharp, and keep you fueled, right, for the future. Now, social impact. You think about social impact. Yeah, I think this has become, and this is more of the informational revolution, I think, is this transparency, right? And are the businesses doing good for people, or doing good for your local community? Are they transparent in the sense of where things are coming from and pesticides and other things that they're using? But there's been a major, obviously, social impact piece to this. And I would say at least 50-75% of the people, when they purchase stuff, they have some social impact in mind of why they're purchasing something, or why they're interested, or why they're excited about it. So that's a great evolution and change that's been going on for a while. But in reality, it's been changing the way people think about their food and how they get it and where it comes from. The other piece is simple, not science, right? To think about it, you want transparency ingredients. You want things simple. You always heard this story, and you probably have seen a lot of presentations where people talk about reading the ingredients on an ingredient deck and actually be able to understand each one of them and know what they are. But also, maybe even down to the micronutrient level of each one of those ingredients. And that's where you've been seeing things like kale, I'm wearing today, and other ingredients become superfoods because people are starting to understand some of the micronutrients in these ingredients and what they mean for your body and how they mean for health. So that has been another big revolution or evolution that's changed in the food space that has really moved the dial quite a bit in a sense of new food values or values where consumers are sitting today. So I kind of highlight, if I can get this next slide, let's move. Kind of the new food world and the way more I see it, and I don't call it food values because I think it's just bigger than that, right? But I think this is where a lot of people are sitting right now. They're like, you know what, there's nourishing people in a different way, right? So this is back to the micronutrients. This is back to nutrient density of food, but it's also around, if we have 9.5 billion people in 2040, how is everybody going to find food? Like, how are we going to make sure we can feed everybody in the world? So you see that come out in a lot of different ways in the industry, and that's where you see a huge movement actually in the plant-based space. It's not just vegan and protecting animals, but it's also around finding ways to get plentiful, I'll call proteins that are easy to travel and actually can get into more mouths around the world. Caring for animals, I think it's just another level, and some of this is just having access to information and video and everything else. People want to make sure that the animals are being taken care of and being thoughtful in the way that people are handling them and getting them out to pasture and other things. And obviously we're seeing benefits from the food we eat, even from the way they treat animals and the way that's been changing. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then renewing the planet, right? So this isn't around, the planet's in great shape today. Let's just, status quo, let's keep it as is. We actually got to build it or get it back to where it was. So there's a lot of conversation around renewing and regenerative, obviously, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. As I walk through kind of the pictures, I just kept it at a high level, but in reality, if you think about that broccoli, and you bought a stalk of broccoli in New York, California, or even Minneapolis for that matter, there's a reason why there's not a nutrition label on there. Each one of them would probably have a different nutrition label. Now, would it be that far off to make you not buy it or think differently? But it would be far enough off that you'd be wondering why broccoli is different in different parts of the country as it's being grown. And it's really around soil health that's driving it. But that's one area, obviously, that there's not a lot of transparency on, that is becoming more and more coming our way to allow us to make better choices on the type of foods that we buy. Pay the farmer, not the doctor later, right? This is around food as medicine. I think people are realizing more and more those micronutrients or superfoods or other things can prevent, a lot of things happening in your life, but also be more proactive instead of reactive, right? So not reactive medicine, but proactive, which is proactive food, to really keep your body healthy and maintain, energy and all the stuff that you want to do in your life and enable all that stuff. So that has been a big enabler, I would say, of the food movement that's going on. And then if you think about taste in food, right, I think we lost a little bit of our flavor in food as farmers were trying to find different ways, to survive and make money, as other industries were looking at, squeezing dollars or others. I mean, there's a, if you think about some of the food today, you can look at apples or others, and heirloom, apples taste way better than some of the current varieties in market. And a lot of that is, not having as much, I'll call water and fiber, but more flavor. And I think people are realizing that, the taste of ingredients are important. It gives you a more experiential way to think about food, especially ingredient by ingredient. And it's actually more of a taste, varietal and adventure, right? Instead of thinking like everything just tastes the same. You should be able to get, broccoli or other things actually around the country and actually get different flavors and tastes just by being in different soils. And I think people have a lot of interest if you think about wine or other categories. They think of it that way, and it's like, well, why isn't food being thought in the same fashion? So I truly see that coming to the forefront as well. Omni-channel is another areas too that is interesting, and omni-channel can mean a lot of things, but all it really means is actually being as many channels or have as much access as possible to consumers. Consumers are looking for many ways to find their food and beverages, a lot more than ever before. And there's still new channels being developed as we speak, but it isn't just, are we on Amazon? Are we on, direct to consumer delivery services, things like that? But it's actually, are we everywhere the consumer wants my product? Do I have access to that? And it could be a baseball field for a kid's game. It could be, there's a lot of different places that I think about just vending and where the vending machines have gone and where they're probably going to go in the future. And there's going to be a lot of more gourmet vending going on in the world just to allow access to better and more nutritious food or even fresher food in differential ways. Think about ag tech too. You've probably heard some stories on cell-based meats, and there's been some work on cell-based honey, which is interesting. Think about ag tech. You also have to think about the environmental impact that's going on with some of the changes in the world from temperature to water usage to a lot of different things that we're worried about in the world, right? That's changing. And an industry that I think it's been around for a long time and continues to get a lot of power is vertical farming. And vertical farming does a lot of things, right? It's a way to actually get a more reliable source. You can grow things, throughout the whole year instead of having regions and different times of year. You can control the environment, right? So then you can get consistency of products month in, month out. And then, if you one of the interesting things they can do there, they can manipulate light to mimic not just sunlight, but actually mimic the spectrum of light, to actually focus on more nutrients than others in certain ingredients, and actually up some ingredients or micronutrition actually in some ingredients because of it. So it gives you a lot more control and a lot more ways to actually find value to give back to the consumer and a way for them to actually pay for that value. And then lastly, if you think about the future of farmers, ag tech, I think, will be some of the areas that build the new farmer, right? Going back to even the vertical farms that are closer to urban environments, it feels like if you could create a farmer that has a few vertical farms that are close to the source, there's some good jobs, I'll call it farming jobs, that will be there to be had, that will continue to grow and actually become like the new word for farming, or the new farmer, and a new type of farmer. So I think there's a lot of work going on in that space. And then regenerative ag, and I that's a well worn out word as well, but it's obviously real, and it's all around building and actually regenerating and actually growing things, not just stripping one area of the land to nourish another area of the land. And you're seeing this. The interesting part with regenerative ag, it's really organic on steroids, and it's a way, I think, to take what the organic movement was doing and actually bring it more mainstream, but also do it in a way that consumers don't have to 100% pay for the benefit, because there's ways for farmers to actually make more money off of different streams within this regenerative ag kind of culture. But it also obviously regenerates the soil, right? And it goes further than organic ever did in some of the practices that are being established that's a part of this whole regenerative ag movement. So, and now you can see some of the corporate large players have some more corporate goals actually around regenerative ag, which will just drive more innovation and actually more funding towards this, which is just a great thing for the world, and puts us in a great spot to see where the soil health is and others in the next 20, 50 years. So now that's kind of the end of that portion. I just wanted to give some background there, and I think it's meaningful as we get into the next section, but you'll see more as I get into it. Allison, have you got any questions or any?
So far I think everyone probably has the background and is good to go. And unless anyone wants to pop up now with Q&A, we can jump right into the COVID portion.
Yeah, no, let's get into this because this is the more the discussion part to your point that I wanted to have as well. But I thought it was important to walk through that so then people had some reminder of kind of where we were at and where it's been going, but also kind of those values. And this ties right directly to COVID in my mind. And being an early stage investor and getting to meet hundreds of brands every year, especially in the food space, in the role that I play for 301 Inc. You can really see this playing out in different ways. But if you think about it, those food values that I just talked about a minute ago, or those aspirations that people are looking for in the food system, to me are not changing. Like it's too critical, and people are too excited, and there's too much investment going in that direction. That nothing's going to change it. Now, what's changed, and I think everybody understands this, that the external forces have changed, right? Overnight. The COVID impact obviously happened quickly and affected everybody very fast, from the farming all the way to the fork, right? Like a lot of people like to say, and it was highly impactful, and it still is impactful. So I'm not going to underestimate that. It's just that it's to me, it doesn't change the values and what we're trying to accomplish. It just either extends time or actually speeds up some things that are already happening, which is just the interesting part of what this thing will become over time. But for sure, there's forces that are going on right now that are real for a lot of consumers and a lot of folks in general. And some of it is pricing pressure. If you have a job that's in an industry that's majorly affected, obviously you're thinking differently about what you're paying for food and how you're getting food and how you're managing your budget overall. If you think about omni-channel, it was already heading that way where a lot of people were ordering food online or getting it shipped directly to their house. But there was still a little bit of a barrier to entry, especially probably to different demographics of folks that just aren't used to being online at all. So maybe even a little bit older crowd. Now we're a little bit forced to maybe even try it just because they didn't have any other options. So once they got over that hurdle, obviously it's going to be a lot more easy in the future to continue to do it, if not at least have it as part of the norm in everybody's lives a little bit differently than it was before. Immunity focus isn't just around the word immunity, but it's really around health and nutrition and how to keep your body in the healthiest position, knowing to fight off any of these infections, diseases, or others. I think everybody sees there's a lot more focus there and understanding, and this becomes a little bit of the mantra for those micronutrients and what do kale and mushrooms and other things can do for you. But it's all around hydration. It's all around gut health. There's a lot of different angles to immunity that are very important to your body and to your system. And I just think that's going to become even more relevant, even though, once again, it's been an ongoing, obviously, trend and excitement in that space. It's just going to continue to go, and it probably is going to go a little bit faster just because of the impact of what's going on over the last few months. And then alt meal solutions isn't around meals per se, but it's really around finding alt ways to get food, right? So think about just the new office environment as people come back, it's definitely going to look different than it was before. Probably more people working from home than ever, having flexible spaces between maybe even between home and office, more than you ever did before, which just means there'll be different types of food solutions that are folks that are looking for and probably didn't need to really look just because they were going to the office every day and they kind of had their usuals or their go-tos, but now they have to come up with a better solution to manage kind of their current environment, which is somewhat changing a little bit around them as an example. But it's meant to be around access to food, but also knowing the environment's changing around, work compared to home life and just kind of that balance that's going on. So if you think about, I'll tick through a few of these, but I won't go into a lot of detail, but innovation and SKU assortment. Now, one of the things that came out of COVID was this major reset in market. And some of it was everybody needed flexibility, right? From the ingredient providers to the co-packers, to the brands, to the retailers on shelf. There were some retailers on shelf that were asking for brands to see if they could cut the tail of their SKUs down a little bit so they can actually focus on their core products a little bit more. But it was more importantly to reduce labor costs on shelf because they couldn't get enough labor at the store shelf during COVID to really service the customer of the business. But it also allowed you to think differently about the consumer, right? The consumer now didn't always know if they're going to get everything on shelf as they go to the stores. Even when you go to, Lunds and Barley's today, you still might not get everything that you normally would have gotten before, because some things are being so pulled so fast out of market that there's a lot of open slots actually in the shelf. But what it's created is, I think, a rethinking of everything from those ingredient providers all the way to the shelf, and just skew assortment. And maybe we actually, rethink a little bit around what's the most important SKUs to have on shelf. So I know retailers are thinking quite hard on that. And we've been on some of our brand guidance a little bit too, around thinking through, the tail end of SKUs and where the focus might be going forward. So there's some changes going on there. And that wouldn't have happened as much, without COVID being in the middle of this. Value options I think are always in the mix, right? Because there's different folks with different amount of affordability, I'll call it, towards food. But I think value options will become more and more important, especially if the country, comes into a recession, and it matters how long it'll be extended. But I think value items will actually still be a needed thing. Now that doesn't mean it has to be super long shelf life or frozen only, but the point is, like, there'll be value options that will be looked for a little bit more during this COVID kind of period, I'll call it. And then food safety to another level. I think most people understand that, right? Even the way they manage in the plants that make the products and foods just change the dynamics of how they manage their shift folks, how they manage the food safety, the cleaning. There's some extra cleaning going on, which will affect cost, it could affect service. But I think it'll bring more innovation, right, to that space, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then brand voice, to me, I call it immunity support, but in reality, it's around how do you look at some of those opportunities that, to think about your brand and your product. It's usually looking for to solve a problem for the consumer. And all I'm saying is that there's some new problems, I guess, that will be more focused on from a consumer standpoint that, you might want to think about as you think about just your voice and how you want to talk to consumers about your products. And then less human interaction with food. That's a little bit around kind of what I was mentioning at the plant level, but also if you think about salad bars or hot bars actually at Whole Foods, there's just a different way of interaction that's going to happen there. So they'll be more prepared probably than there'll be as much that you can serve your own or actually touch and feel some of the products. And then from a traditional space, I think there'll just be more ways of getting food than there are today, just because of that. We've seen some brands even create food trucks where they just do local delivery of their ice creams or other things that they never had before, just because they wanted to get different avenues to get to consumers and actually keep it local, which was a great idea to think about, especially during this time. And then lastly, and I'll open up the questions after this, it's really around the investor side of things. And this is the crux of the conversation today a little bit. But if you think about it, investors are definitely going to be cautious, but money is available for great ideas. Even the interest rates and all the rates in the market for borrowing and for getting cash will remain low, probably the lowest in history. So I actually think it'll allow for liquidity in the market in the sense of funding, but I also think there'll be just a stronger eye on the investment piece to really make sure they're investing in, breakthrough ideas and unique items and things that actually make sense to the new world actually over the next few years. I think there'll be just a little bit more scrutiny there than normal. And some of it comes from, unpredictable environment, right? Leads to lower risk. People will just want to take a lower risk position on anything, and including it on the investor side. So there'll be probably a little bit more window shopping and less buying in the short term, but for sure it's a little bit more just taking that stronger look to make sure that they're not doing a Me Too product as much, and they're doing, they're investing in things that they think can have legs, and as they understand the shelf space a little bit differently, like I mentioned earlier, I mean that could affect the way people invest as well. And then from a balanced investment approach, not that it was the Wild West by any means, but definitely a lot of the focus, especially in early stage, was around top line growth. And the if you can get a brand to grow, 70, 80, 90% a year. I mean, that was one of the main focuses, even though, there's always some balance to it around, you got to create a business that's sustainable. But I think what you're going to see a little bit more now too is investors don't mind if the growth wasn't as high, as long as there was a strong or stronger margin story. And some of that is just to have a more balanced approach in the sense of building your business, but also extending the runway a little bit more with the dollars you have, so that you're not in the market so often trying to raise capital, and trying to use a little bit of a longer term approach in that aspect as well. So I think you'll see some changes from there. If you're a current brand looking for cash or money, you might have heard some of these stories. And then systematic investment will increase, right? And this is all around infrastructure. And it's back to a few of the stories I mentioned earlier, but really it's around if there was always a need for fresh food, home delivery, right? That's always been a strong kind of need over the last 10, 12, 15, 20 years. And you've seen it come out in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of great brands out there that are currently doing that. But I'll tell you just from my experience, the last mile of getting it to someone's house is actually still hyper expensive. And that's one of the eggs they got to crack in that space to actually make it not just affordable, but actually to make it a super sustainable business from a margin standpoint. And what you'll probably see a little bit more, and it's already kind of coming our way, is some autonomous delivery, right? Some, I don't know, it might be drones or it might be others, but you'll see more investment in that type of space to increase the likelihood of those types of margins and consistency in delivery and things like that. I could see that coming, but there's a lot more examples beyond that. But I was just trying to give one example of that. You'll see some systematic like infrastructure changes that will have to happen. And then lastly, if you think about even on that investment side, back to this cleaning and cleanliness, there's just a whole other world of cleaning that will need to be had, and management of food that wasn't there, 6-9 months ago, right? So this COVID piece and how careful that people will want to be in the future, I think will drive tons of innovation in this space. And it'll take a little while, but it'll start with, manually cleaning and once people realize that margin is affected quite a bit with just even extra cleaning at a plant level, there'll be some innovation around it that figures out how to actually do that more efficiently and easy, that will allow, these plants and the margins to get in a healthier spot again. But the point is, like, the cleaning and the food safety aspect is just going to go to a whole nother level, after COVID. So that's another area of strong investment that I could see happening. And then what it results to is just, a stronger food ecosystem, right? At the end of the day, they might weed out a few folks and brands and products that are in the system today that might not have been doing that well anyways with consumers, and hope that's not the case unless the consumer truly picks the winner or not. But the point is, like, the overall food system should end up in a stronger spot, and then actually have some stronger focus areas to really see some mass improvement, including that food safety that I mentioned. And then from an innovation environment standpoint, I actually think back to these food values, the innovation environment will be as robust as it has ever been. It'll continue to drive towards plant-based and ag tech and all the great things that you've been seeing already. And it's a lot to go back to what I originally was mentioning around how we're going to feed 9.5 billion people and get them enough protein. How are we going to protect the planet and make sure everybody's doing well, but then also how are we going to feed people more nutrition as they think about food as medicine and be more proactive at it. Those are three major areas that still will bring a lot of innovation to the food ecosystem. So anyway, so that's all I have. And if there's any questions, or Allison, do you have any questions for me? I would love to answer a few.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pete. So first off, I had one or two people say they had a little hard time hearing you. So maybe for the question portion, if you lean.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
We'll be able to make sure everyone can hear all of your answers.
Got it.
And then kind of a sidebar, we had a question about nutrients, micronutrients and nutrients in general. And they mentioned AURI having testing,
Yeah.
being a testing source for this, which I believe some of those friends are on the line now. And the question was more of, can they get to the level of micronutrient analysis? And since that is a more AURI focused question, I'm sure you can reach out to someone there to get that exact answer. For the purpose of this conversation, I want to keep it focused on the investor standpoint and
Right.
how startups can focus on that. But the first question in that regard is, what should food entrepreneurs keep in mind in a short term and long term? And I'm guessing this is in where should they invest their own dollars and time, and kind of what are investors looking for in the short term in terms of demonstrating their value of being investable now and also being investable long term.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing we always look at from an investment standpoint, are you listening to the consumer and are you really reacting to the consumer needs? So once again, I think, as some of these changes are not permanent by any means, but some will be, including food safety and other things. And I think as the more you can talk through, I'll call this immunity thing as just an example of a bunch of things. So it's not the only thing by any means. If you can talk to consumers a little bit more around some of the great things that you have in your product today that probably are a great defense around immunity or other parts of human health. And you wouldn't force yourself to do it if it didn't make sense. But the point is, if it did and you weren't communicating it, this is back to listening to the consumers and kind of their current needs and wants. And you want to tailor your marketing and communication plan, towards that. And I think, if you do that and you once again listen and you continue to tweak it as you go, you'll find new growth avenues, I think, for your products and brands as you continue to do that. So we always love, a founder or a CEO that's in, close touch, I'll call it, with the consumer and really understands kind of the needs and what they're trying to solve as a brand or a product and how they communicate it. And then, and then back to the other piece I think too is showing, this transparency, and I would say showing empathy is another way, especially during these times, to show kind of your true colors as a brand. There was a lot of folks early on, obviously didn't want to communicate too much because there was, this is people are dying, right? It's a tough time that's going on right now. But at the same time, showing empathy from your customers to ingredient providers, to your co-packers, to others, just showing that you're a true partner through and through, I think is another area of long-term benefit that gets us excited when we see that. And we've seen our brands actually react that way and actually work their ecosystem quite well. And it's, once again, it knows that you're understanding that this is a fluid moment and that you're actually working your way to the best spot possible.
That was a great lead into the second half of this question, Pete, which is, what are some successful food brands that are adapting to the current food environment?
Which brands are they, or yeah?
Just in general, if there are brands you've seen in the market that you think are doing well to adapt to the current food environment.
Yeah, no, there's a bunch of them that are doing well, but I think if you think about where people are moving to, and it goes back to, I call it omni-channel, but a lot of it's been just direct, right? And I think there's a few brands I've seen, like I said before, they used their food truck that was for sampling and then they moved it into a delivery truck just to help them get through the situation and actually provide another source of revenue. I think there's been a few interesting brands that have done quite a good job, I would say, rejiggering their communication, like I mentioned earlier, around not just immunity, but also convenience and ways to use their products at home for home cooking and for being an ingredient just as well as being a finished product, which I think is a great way to establish a more meaningful connection with your consumer, but also finding solutions, knowing that people were at home more and actually looking for ideas actually for home cooking or for add-ons to things. And then I think there has been a few, or a segment of few that really kind of put their money where the mouth is, in the sense of like helping out their local community and was really there for them and even gave away product and other things. But I think it just shows their passion and what they were, they're originally in it because they just want to fix the food system and they have a problem to be solved for consumers in general, but they use some of that to actually, push some good back into the economy during this time. Those are three, 4 or 5, I'll call examples because there's a group of brands in each one of them probably that have done it quite well, just to stay away from probably name and brand.
Awesome. All right, we have a question around consumer research. How are food startups currently handling consumer research at this time? What can make it easier for them to do so? And after a product is at the market, does consumer or product research become a luxury or unnecessary expense that companies would not usually spend on during a recession? So thinking about where these companies might spend their dollars right now if they have limited resources. Consumer research.
Yeah, I mean, think about your marketing budget. I mean, it changed overnight because for small young brands, sampling is typically the way to get your first moment of truth for consumers, right? To get it in their mouths, let them try it, and then hopefully drive some repeat by the great quality of taste, the messaging, the box, or the packaging, things like that. That changed overnight, and so did the budgets change. So it went on to online and social, and it was trying to figure out, I'll call hooks for lack of a better word, but ways in to actually get consumers excited to learn more or understand. Now, you knew that consumers had more time at home to maybe read or do some research. So it allowed you to actually tell a little bit longer of a story than you normally can, in my mind. So if you do that well on the social side, you can actually get to people with a little bit more meaningful touch. So that's been an interesting way to move some cash around. But I think from a consumer testing and new product standpoint, it was, there's a time where even retailers are like, you know what, we're not bringing any new products because I don't want to add any more complexity to the current system. That's becoming back to the norm where they're actually allowing that to happen more and more. But there's been a lot of delays. But one way I know a few of our brands have used some great online tools. Now, you don't necessarily get product in people's mouths that way, but you can definitely show visuals and packaging diagrams and others to at least get a sense for where consumers' excitement would be for your product or your price point or the ingredients. You can really talk through this kind of micronutrition and all that stuff quite well in these environments. So there's a few tools online. There's a few tools that we use at 301 Inc. There's a few tools I've seen other brands use as well, but they're online kind of recruiting tools for consumers, but also a way to actually just engage with consumers virtually, which obviously, in the last few months, that would be one of the best ways to get to people.
Thanks, Pete. And two things to add from the situation of consumer research. A lot of companies, because they're no longer doing testing in-house, and this goes for major corporations like General Mills, like Target and others, they will now send out and use third-party companies that will ship that product to the consumers at home. Now, this tends to be a very expensive solution, so maybe not as practical for a company in the startup phase. So that's one piece of the puzzle that can work.
Yeah, and then the only thing you got to worry about there is, if it's a product that's not in market and doesn't have ingredient decks or others, because I get tons of samples delivered to my house for supporting some of the brands we look at. A lot of them come without ingredient decks or just samples or tests, and I'm a known entity when it comes to, like, I know they're shipping it to me and I know what they're doing, but even a third party shipping stuff might get a little bit leery on folks. But to your point, it is highly expensive actually to do that.
I was going to say the other
piece. It can be
piece,
effective, but it's highly expensive.
Another piece that is helpful right now is the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has a cost sharing program where normally they would help fund in-store sampling programs. And because of COVID and the shift of this, they're now moving towards supporting e-commerce. So if you are a company that is looking to do that, then you might be able to find a way to use those dollars and boost your e-commerce marketing and ways to reach consumers that way, which actually will be a wonderful lead-in. Next month, we'll have a event focused around e-commerce and the different facets of that. So there will be more to come on that in the next month, but just to keep an eye on that. And then one other, from a follow-up, when you think about that shift of people going in store to do product exploration and discovery and shifting to online, Pete, how do you think investors are looking at products and where they are positioned? I know earlier you mentioned the more places a product can be to hit all the different places a consumer might
Touch
be.
points.
But how are investors looking at where a consumer is located? Sorry, where a product is located when the consumer is looking for it?
Yeah, and you see it at Whole Foods a little bit because of, they've lost, it'll come back, but they had 50% loss in foot traffic, right? And then people are trying to go in and out of stores so quickly and come in with a list, and when maybe you'd walk in and do just some browsing and shopping, and so you lost a little bit of that exploration that was going on, like on shelf, right? But what we do know is online, actually, people love to explore, and and it cuts across every probably category of buying consumers products. So that is a great way to actually share and show a lot of innovation and actually try to get some excitement that way. Back to the omni-channel thing, there's just a lot of different ways to get into the consumer's hands, and I think just being thoughtful and thinking through that. Now, it's not probably the best move to go into another, channel outside of a virtual one, at this moment in time, but in the 6 months or so from now, there might be another physical channel that would make sense to go into and be a part of. Obviously Costco is considered almost its own channel on it by itself. That's a great, obviously, usually sampling venue, as well as a more of a marketing play typically than it is really a margin or it's a volume play, but it's not a margin play, but it's a great sampling play and a marketing play. But point is, Costco, I know, has been looking for a lot of great innovation during this time as well, and trying to get even more discovery than they even had, because they know at least at their stores, they're looking for that variety and excitement level, since people are frequently going there probably more often than they ever have before. So I think it'll just change over time a little bit, but the omni-channel thing is just going to be table stakes. I mean, you could see it even in the restaurant world. I mean, since restaurants had to do pickup and online ordering, and once you built that capability, right, there's no reason why you probably turn it off, even if you get people back into the restaurant. So it's kind of one of those things that once you got it and it makes sense, and you can actually generate not just cash but profitable cash with it, I mean, there's no reason to turn it off. So that's where I think the omni-channel is going to be interesting, because now all of a sudden it's opening up a lot of new folks for products that actually can be shared at home.
Thanks, Pete. I think your comment about Costco is another great lead into a question we have around private labeling. For those who don't know, a lot of grocery stores have their own private labels. Target has a couple different labels. Costco has a label. Numerous grocers do. And saying the cost of entry seemed to be a barrier. Any advice for that realm? And maybe in light of, a lot of times new food companies want to trade on their own name. That's how they get brand recognition before going down that route. But if they are open to doing own brand labeling right off the bat, any comments around that?
Yeah, I mean, I always think about Trader Joe's, right? It's just a model of success that shows that not all consumers are tied to a brand and the emotion side of it. And then if they're looking for the quality, and they're looking for a great tasting product, and obviously products that serve certain needs that they have. But so I think there's a balanced approach there. But I think there's obviously a great space for brands, and even build some extra empathy and understanding of who they are and what they stand for and what they should go for. But back to the branded side, I continue to see that being a vital part of the ecosystem, right? You always see retailers go kind of a little bit back and forth, like they'll lean stronger on some of their in-store, and then all of a sudden they decide they want to get more external and do more external brands. And I think, once again, as long as there's strong innovation in the pipeline of ideas that are coming that consumers are clamoring for, there will always be a balance. But I think they'll lean more heavy on, the latest and greatest brands that can really drive some new customers and consumers into their stores, as long as they show a sign of investment, but also obviously that this growth is sustainable, and you can maintain certain dollar numbers on shelf per SKU, per flavor, per week kind of thing. So there's a balance there, but once again, I think the quality side went out the window a little bit in the food safety side, because I think people realize that the food system in general is pretty safe. But with COVID too, I think it's driven some people back to some traditional brands to try to get some safety, even though I don't know if that's real safety or not. But the point is, like, that might change the way people think about private label. I'm not 100% sure about that, but that slightly can change just during this COVID environment.
So Pete, I want to shift into kind of the different areas of CPG products. As you look at different parts of the grocery store, there's center of store that's dry grocery with a lot of snacks, there's frozen, there's fresh, there's dairy. What areas are you seeing the most growth in from an investor standpoint, and where do you think there will be the most growth coming up?
Yeah, I know that's a great question, and it's ever evolving because there's just new ways to think about different segments within the grocery store, right? So, and you're always looking for a little bit of the sleepy categories that are still quite large that need some disruption. We just made an investment in a plant-based seafood company called Good Catch, and it was kind of on that premise, right?
I was waiting for plant-based to come up.
Yeah, there you go, right? Yeah, so plant-based, is a big trend. So if you can drive a great high quality, the ingredients and taste is number one, but at the same time, affordable and comparable. I mean, that consumers don't think about Meatless Monday the same as they used to. If they know they have options now that actually taste, and in some cases maybe even taste better or apply better to what their lifestyle is as an everyday item. So, and you're seeing them more and more with Beyond Meats and other things as they move that out more mainstream. But so plant-based is one area, but I would say from a category of frozen remains interesting, and that probably even more interesting, and because it comes with a balance of, you don't need a lot of preservatives, right? So you can be very simple ingredient wise. You can actually have high quality for sure in the frozen world, but then it gives you a little bit of flexibility in the sense of extendability, when you get it home, or convenience in the sense of, like, when I want it, I can pull it out and use it. I think there's some work there, I think, on technology just to make the prep a little bit faster. But the point is, that is definitely an area of a little bit more interesting, just because of the simplicity of ingredients and the quality that can be created through frozen. Refrigerated and fresh, obviously still super exciting, and tons of people are interested in new products and new ideas in that space. Once again, some categories are doing amazingly well. Some are still, I think, struggling to find what that truly means. And then, it's not the easiest thing to make a margin actually in the fresh space when you have short shelf life. So that's kind of been what folks have been working on in that space. But those 2 or 3 areas are probably the most exciting in the grocery store right now.
Thanks for that. One area that was very high on everybody's list a year or so ago was CBD and products around that. And I think the evolution of that now has been into functional foods or functional beverages. Have those been popping up more on your radar as things to look at, or is that kind of just an underlying waiting to see how the consumer reacts over time before investing in that space?
Yeah. We've done enough research to know that, CBDs come with real benefits, right? And there's other compounds actually within the cannabis plant that I think will be meaningful as well over time as there's more research done. But on the other side, for General Mills or even for 301 Inc., it is a little bit of wait and see, because there's state by state regulations that are changing, especially in the food piece, and it's a little different obviously in the health and beauty side of things, which that's where you've seen some of the original CBD stuff pop up. But as it moves in the food and beverage, some are probably doing it, illegally, to be honest with you, in some states that probably don't have their regulations figured out yet. But there are obviously states that have figured it out, and there are brands and products in there that are taking advantage of it in a great way and actually coming with some good products. We know in Canada, obviously, is another hotbed for CBDs, and not just the ingredient, but also products over time. And they're probably a little ahead of us, not from the farm side of regulation side, but more from the retail piece, where in another 6-9 months, they'll probably allow food items with CBDs in it actually in their traditional grocery stores. Which some folks in the line might go like, hey, I've seen one in Lund's or something, but that would be some that's probably a one-off that not 100% sure it should be there or not. But the point is, the regulations are so dicey right now. It makes it very hard to really dive in any meaningful way. But we know CBDs as well as other compounds is going to have a meaningful impact to consumers.
Yep.
It's just kind of watching it grow up a little bit, and the regulations that subside a little bit, and then we'll figure out what that means.
All right, so we have another one coming through here. How do investors assess non-financial risks in making their investment decisions, i.e. food safety, processing capabilities, regulatory, and claims risks, which I think probably spurned off that functional foods question. So non-financial risks in making your decisions.
No, claims are definitely part of it for sure. And some of it is, just looking at the future and the type of research and work that's being done behind some of these claims. As an example, even a brand that we have in our portfolio, this isn't much of a claim as anything, but it's more around food safety though, because the dry fruit and veggie, slow drying of fruit and veggies as an example, doesn't really truly have a kill step in the process. It's the heat's too low, the process is way too long. It doesn't mean it's not food safe, because it is. And as long as you're protecting what's coming from the field and other ways of managing it, you could easily get by and be very safe. And that's how that platform across anybody that's in that space has managed it. But it doesn't have a true kill step. So if you have a company that has a mandatory kill step, as an example, and that doesn't mean it's a legal reason, but it's more around where the company stands when it comes to food safety. It could knock that company out of investing or being a part of that brand or product because of it. So it is. There's definitely a lot of claims. There's definitely a lot of things around food safety. Where ingredients come from, that are all in the kind of mix as we're thinking through our investment strategy. And I'm assuming that's the way it would work for all investors.
I think in light of COVID, supply chain resiliency has been a really big issue for both farmers, small and large. And so taking into consideration, to your point, where are those ingredients coming from? Do they need to source something from far away, or is it readily accessible and available year round or during the processing season for them? One last question before we wrap up, and that is General Mills is lucky to have a hand in each pot of both the CPG world and the agriculture side. And when you look at companies to invest in, what is the breakout going to be, do you think, between looking at purely CPG companies versus more of the ag tech and that kind of side of things?
Yeah, currently for 301 Inc., we're chartered to really just be a branded consumer-facing investment arm. For sure, other folks within General Mills obviously keep their eyes on it and are are tight with a lot of some new technologies and industry-leading things in the ag tech space. We probably won't spend a lot of time there just because we don't feel like we currently have the right team to really do tons of focus there or not. But for sure, the ag tech that leads to a brand that we can see that has potential, and it either gives it some kind of I'll call in food you don't get a lot of IP, right? So if you can create some technology or find some tech that gives you some insulation as you develop a consumer facing brand that uses it, that is the area that we'll play in. So it's hard to say is it 100% one or the other, because there'll definitely be a blend, and from personalized nutrition to a lot of different things. It's going to drive a blend of that conversation to actually find the newest brands that we think make sense. But anything with a little insulation to get started you're always in a good spot.
Wonderful. All right, well, we are nearing the end of time here. I know we still have quite a people online. If you want to go into the chat, as Andy did, and share your information, looking to connect with those, we welcome that right now in the next few minutes. Otherwise, Pete, I would like to say thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all the information. And I know you've been a big collaborator and advocate for Grow North and the food ecosystem here in Maine. So we are happy to have you. So we will.
Thank you. I'm excited I could help.
All right, we will keep the webinar up if those want to chat for the next minute or two. Otherwise, we will shut down in a few minutes. And thank you everyone for joining us today, and stay tuned for future events from Grow North. Thanks so much.